The scene in Dune Part 2 that made me cry was, of course, the worm riding test. And here's a short commentary as to why it made me cry. Now, before I mention anything else, I have to stress something about me personally. I am not a person who cries easily in life. I'm one of those people who's been through a lot and has kind of learned to keep his emotions to himself, especially his deepest ones. Because in my mind, and I know this is wrong, it's something I'm trying to work on, my brain perceives showing emotions like crying as sheer weakness. Not just in front of other people, but also when I'm by myself. If I'm alone and I feel like crying, my brain tells me not to be a pussy. And it's actually really hard for me to dare to say this out loud on the effing internet, but I'm forcing myself to do it in the name of trying to change and let go. And so, I don't cry easily, which is putting it mildly. Members of my family have died, and I've shed not a single tear. People have hurt me, and I've remained outwardly unmoved as a stone. Other people have cried on me, literally bowling in my arms, and yet my eyes never even felt an itch. But then, always, the one and only thing that breaks me, that manages to tumble the walls around me, is art. Films, literature, paintings, music, they are my true weakness. There's a giant lump in my throat every time I see the scene where, after the Battle of Pelennor, Éomer sees Éowyn lying unconscious among the corpses, and he just runs towards her screaming with a look of sheer terror on his face. And a few months ago, I couldn't stop crying for like 30 minutes when Mikasa cut off Aaron's head and then just kissed it right after. And 15 years ago, when for the first time I read God Emperor, and Leto II was about to tumble into the river to his death, but he first saw his beloved Hui Nori fall down, saying to him, "I'll go on ahead of you, my love." It took me days to recover from the depression over that ending. To put it shortly, I'm not easily broken, but art is the one thing that breaks me. And in Dune Part 2, this one amazing scene where Paul rode a worm for the first time, this was the scene from the film that broke me. And I teared up right there in the theater. Now, one might ask, why the hell was that scene the one that broke me? Given that it doesn't have any sort of death of a beloved character or anything that's generally perceived as more emotional, why would I cry from a scene of just some guy riding a giant desert slug? Well, in my case, it was because of realism and sense of association. What do I mean by that? For me, in Dune, and especially the first couple of novels, one of the most iconic things has always been worm riding in the desert. Reading the books for the first time, I was utterly mesmerized by the idea of gigantic sci-fi worm monsters living in an endless ocean of sand and humans just riding them. And I used to try and imagine it all the time, and how horrifyingly difficult but also fascinating it would look. You being on top of this giant monster, speeding through insane dust clouds and sand dunes, which on a gigantic scale of such a creature, it moving through the desert would literally render the desert environment into more of a body of water, as if you're in an ocean and the dunes are just waves. And since the thing you're riding is so enormous that you can't even see it from end to end, your brain would literally make you feel as if you're sailing on a ship. And if you remember that cheesy scene from Titanic where they're perched up on the ship's bow and saying they're flying, as stupid as it sounds at first glance, I have to say it's true. I was in Greece once, years ago, traveling between islands on a very big ferry, and I tested this out. I went to the bow of the ship, isolated my peripheral vision of the ship around me, and looking just at the sea horizon, hurling itself in your direction, it really feels like you're freaking flying over the water. And because I was such a Dune nerd, I imagined myself on the back of a giant worm in the desert. It was one of the most profound experiences that I've had in my life. And this was, I think, in 2012, so more than 10 years ago at this point. And yet the feeling is still crystallized in my brain. And when I watched Dune Part 2, and we got to the worm ride scene, on the giant IMAX screen in front of me, we got to see through Paul's eyes as the giant worm was plowing through the sand and going over a big dune to reveal beyond it the vast ocean of the desert, as if you just passed over the edge of a tsunami. And to me, it felt the same as on that ship all of these years ago. My peripheral vision isolated, my brain making me feel like I'm flying. Only this time, I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't imagining the scene, I wasn't imagining the worm or the desert. They were there on the huge screen, and it was just as I had pictured it. The same feeling of weightlessness, the horizon just tumbling toward you, and the sense that in this one perfect moment, nothing else matters. It's just you, the beast beneath you, and the future ahead of you. And because the film struck this old memory in me to such a level of precision, I cried right then and there. I was broken. It just felt like in that moment I was given such a precious gift by these filmmakers. It's like they reached down in the depths of my soul and asked me what I wanted to see and how exactly I wanted to see it. And when you're given something that reflects you so deeply to your core, I just think nothing in the world can top that feeling. And I'll be forever grateful to these people for giving me this. I paid in the theater for this movie 3 times in a row. I'll buy the DVDs, the soundtrack, everything. Just take my money and make me cry.